Nice to have you listening to At Issue. We wrap up a talk afternoon, beginning of a year. We look ahead. We look a little bit behind, too. We'll talk this hour about wake-up calls, crack-ups, crackdowns. Well, all sorts of trends being forecasted by Gerald Celente. Those of you who've heard the show before have heard Gerald Celente before, founder of the Trends Research Institute, editor and publisher of the Trends Journal. And he talks with us from time to time about the state of affairs in this country and the signs and signals he sees about where we're going. And, of course, I'll take your calls, too. 800-486-8655. We'll get your calls shortly. Gerald Celente, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Ben. Thanks for having me on. There's a lot of years we've been doing this.
I know.
Already.
I know. The hair is now gray. Wake-ups, crack-ups, crime waves, cyber crime. We've got lots to talk about. Before we do, I'm going to take you back. We did this show about 12 months ago. You talked about the coming crash of 2010. And a lot of people were concerned and believed that we would see that. You said in 2007, you predicted the panic of 08. In November 2008, you forecast the collapse of 09. In March 09, the global equity markets collapsed. You said what really was concerning you, though, last year at this time was the crash of 2010. But stock market has rebounded pretty well. The car industry has rebounded pretty well. The jobs haven't come back the way we thought they would, but the crash of 2010 didn't happen. What happened to mess up your prediction?
Well, when we made the forecast in our Trends Journal in the winter of 2009 for the crash of 2010, we made it very clear that, number one, we weren't talking about the stock market, and we had forecast some kind of a global economic crisis that would make it very well known that this bailout schemes wouldn't work. And we also said in very plain and simple language that the Trends Research Institute cannot predict what undreamed of schemes central banks will dream up this time to avert the crisis. And here's the scheme that they dreamed up that we didn't know about until about a month ago. And because of the Dodd-Frank legislation, this one-time reporting from the Federal Reserve showed that they had shuffled out into the world over $14 trillion, that's with a T, dollars worth of loans and deals to foreign banks, to hedge funds, to businesses such as Harley-Davidson over there, General Electric, McDonald's, Verizon, money flowing into the Bank of Japan, banks in South Korea, in England and Ireland, in Spain, in France and Germany and the Netherlands. This is unparalleled.
And this leads you to the first trend you're predicting this year called the wake-up call.
Yes, because we don't know these things are going on behind our back. This thing should have collapsed because there's another one on top of it. And that is when we were forecasting troubles in Europe from sovereign debt defaults, what did they do? Oh, they changed the rules of the Maastricht Agreement and the Lisbon Treaty. So they said they would never bail out countries. They would go default. No, they're not.
But because the global economy is so linked today, isn't it necessary that we want to bail out Greece or Ireland or Germany if it needed, or France and China, and keep all of these global economies strong?
Well, that's the big lie. Who are we keeping strong? It's the too big to fails, and that's why you're seeing these riots in Europe. What they call austerity measures, Ben, let's look at Ireland's austerity measures. Oh, they cut the minimum wage by 12%. Oh, and those services and pensions and benefits, they're going to be cut too. Oh, and by the way, that tuition you're paying for go to college, we're going to raise that. And we're also going to raise your taxes. And then the people saying, well, wait a minute, why is this happening? Well, because the banks are in trouble. Well, who do the banks owe money to? The banks owe money to other banks. That's who's holding all this paper. The banks are holding money to all these big hedge funds and private equity groups. That's who we're bailing out. They're not bailing out Patty over there. His deposits aren't in danger. So when we're looking at what's going on, calling it interconnectedness, it certainly is. It's one world bank, and it's not. And by the way, this was the whole in the entire 1800s, from the beginning of the founding of this country. This was the major issue, with the central banks take over the nation.
One of the other trends that we were just talking about in the last hour, talking about the state government direction and what we're going to do to balance our budget or what needs to be done. And the governor, not governor now, Scott Walker, saying, well, jobs, my number 1, 2, and 3 priorities. When you look at what government is going to do for the people, and I asked my guests, is creating jobs the job of government?
No. What the government done is they created legislation that sent our jobs away. Let's call a spade a spade. When was the United States the most egalitarian nation? Following World War II and prior to NAFTA. And now the gap between the rich and the poor is the widest in the U.S. of any of the industrialized nations. Remember when we were a kid, you got a toy from Japan. It was a piece of junk. And then they not only started manufacturing there, they took our technology. The same thing is now happening in China. This is not free trade. All it was moving manufacturing over there, the Chinese saying, okay, you can manufacture it here and use our slave labor, because after all, it's still totalitarian China, and their GDP, per capita GDP, ranks, sorry, an average worker in a manufacturing facility makes the grand total of $200 a month. So, yeah, but you could bring your stuff over here, but we want your technology. And now you're seeing it changing. They're not only the manufacturers of low-level textiles, they have put in more inventions this year, and patents inventions, than we have in the United States. And by 2015, they're going to have 1 million patents, new patent inventions, compared to our maybe 350,000, 850,000, 450,000. So the game has changed. So these legislators that are talking about creating jobs, what genius has been endowed upon their minds to create jobs? And my master's, by the way, is in public administration. And I began my career in this field. And I know the facts and the data. And the facts are that all of these sweetheart deals that they give to these big corporations to open business there and create jobs, like loan guarantees, infrastructure repairs, tax breaks, they cost the population and they enrich the corporation. It's not a zero-sum game. The money goes into the corporate coffers. It creates jobs at a very high expense.
We talk a lot about this in this program in various forms, and it's not actually in your list of top trends for this year, but I'm just curious because one of the ways some of what you're talking about happens, and we can't afford what we do at the federal level, is we just increase the federal debt. And I'm wondering what that does to affect the trending you talk about.
Oh, that's the kind of that has been already put into the mix. We're $14 trillion in debt. They're never going to be able to pay this off. And what they're doing is they're devaluing the dollar, and they're paying it off with cheaper bucks. And that's one of the reasons why gasoline prices are going up so quickly, because so many of the commodities, it's supply and demand on one end, but the commodities are based in dollars. And you're seeing a devaluation of the dollar. You pick up today's Financial Times, and what does the headline read? The headline reads that the Federal Reserve is going to continue to use this so-called QE2, this financial stimulus. They're going to keep it going. They're not going to stop. They're going to continue to print this digital money and put the nation deeper in debt. I think the total comes out to, I'm not sure, but it's about $44,000 per individual to pay off. It will never be paid off. They're sending the nation into bankruptcy.
At the same time, one of the lead stories this morning, I believe I was listening to National Public Radio in the car, was that the recovery, slow as it is beginning to have serious legs.
Well, yes, it is, to the extent that, as I said, we already knew that they pumped in $13 trillion that was lent, spent, and guaranteed, and now what they're doing, as I said, there's another, depending on whose estimates you look at, of the money that was shuffled under the table, was somewhere between 14 to $20 trillion. So, yes, this is a recovery until the stimulus runs out. This QE2 of $600 billion plus all. You cannot create a recovery by printing money.
Now, you also say one of the trends you expect is an increase in crime, which people already say we have pretty high level. Are you expecting it to increase significantly?
Well, it's going to increase at different levels and in different ways. And first of all, crime has become as American as apple pie. Look at what's going on at the top level with these financial institutions. You haven't seen one big head roll. Oh, there was the Bernie Madoff, but he was small potatoes compared to what went on with all these banking robo-frauds and all of these dirty loan deals on and on from Countrywide. You see fines, you never see time. And so the people looking and they're saying, look, these guys are getting away with criminality. You look down at the lower end, the gangs, they're getting away with it, down to the welfare cheat. So you're going to start seeing people who have no jobs, who have mounting debt, and no hope for employment, losing it. And as I say, when people lose everything and have nothing left to lose, they lose it. We're going to see, and although the data, and I'll give you an example, right here in good old New York, they've been cooking the crime data. It's a fact. They've been lying about the crime statistics, trying to show that crime is going down when in fact it's going up. So it's just a natural progression or digression. When people lose it, they commit more crimes, their stress levels go up, their fuses get shortened, and you start seeing heinous acts being committed.
Gerald, I got to take a break. I want to invite some phone calls. You give a totally new twist to the phrase happy hour. Gerald Celente is the founder of the Trends Research Institute, speaking to us from New York, editor and publisher of the Trends Journal, talking about the trends as he sees them and taking your calls on your analysis of what you see in terms of the lives we lead in our state, nation, and our world. This is At Issue.